Whitehouse slams Pam Bondi over false statements in DOJ hearing. And the moment it happened, the entire room shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was the kind of controlled detonation that locks everyone's attention because you can feel something bigger underneath the words. And if you weren't watching closely, you might have missed the exact second Senator Sheldon Whitehouse decided he'd had enough. Enough of the excuses. Enough of the selective outrage. Enough of the country pretending that truth is optional in places where truth used to be the whole point.
Here's the second thing, and this goes back to the ranking member's comments about yesterday. To me, yesterday was an awful day in the history of this committee. It set new low after new low after new low. And I'm not going to talk about all of the new lows. I'm going to talk about one in particular. And that is whether anybody noticed the irony that the day before the United States Department of Justice arraigned a former FBI director for allegedly making untruthful statements to this committee, the Attorney General of the United States sat right there and made untruthful statements to this committee. And they weren't maybe untruthful statements. This wasn't a question of nuance. She made allegations about the ranking member and me having received political contributions from some, she said, Epstein close confidant. Well, guess what? That's actually checkable. There's a thing called the Federal Election Commission. The Federal Election Commission keeps a website that tracks all of our contributions. An intern at the Department of Justice could have checked to see that the allegation, I'll leave it to myself, that I had received campaign contributions from this individual, that was false. And it's not a maybe answer. It's a yes or no. Did I or didn't I? And there's an unimpeachable record that shows that what she said sitting right there was not true. If we are going to care about untruthful statements made by the Department of Justice and the FBI in this committee, let's not have this be yet another area where there are different rules for one party than for the other party. And just by the way, on that very subject, the other thing that the Attorney General did sitting right there was to strip all cover away from the untruthful statements that had been made to this committee by the current FBI director. You all heard him here. He said that he couldn't tell us about his grand jury testimony in the Mar-a-Lago case, where he first pled the Fifth, then got immunity, and then testified. He couldn't tell us what he testified to, he said, because the Department of Justice had sealed the testimony and because there was a court order barring him from doing that. And he actually identified which judge, the chief judge of the D.C. Federal District Court. Well, guess what? We know that since then, the chief judge of the Federal District Court has said that that was not true. He said specifically nothing prevented Director Patel from discussing his grand jury testimony. And yesterday, the Attorney General had the chance to say, you're right. We did seal the testimony in that matter. The Department of Justice did seal the testimony, and Patel's statement was true. Not about the court order, but at least it was sealed by the Department of Justice. She didn't say that. So now both his testimony that the DOJ had sealed his testimony and his testimony there was a court order barring his testimony are kind of demonstrably false statements to this committee. And then when he came back and we challenged him on those false statements, his second false statement was to say, I'm not going to answer any of those questions because my transcript of the grand jury testimony, I've worked with the DOJ to see that it is publicly released. Well, it either has been publicly released or it hasn't. It's a very simple distinction, yes or no. And we all know that it has not, in fact, been publicly released. And when we asked about that from the Attorney General, again, she left him high and dry and refused to say that anything had been publicly released, that there was any publicly released transcript. So yesterday stands in really stark contrast. I should say the day before yesterday stands in really stark contrast to yesterday. Yesterday, an FBI director was arraigned for making a false statement. The day before that, the Attorney General of the United States made arguably even falser statements. We'll see how the other case turns out. And she left the current FBI director completely exposed on his multiple false statements that his grand jury testimony in the Mar-a-Lago case had been sealed by the department, was under court order not to be released, and had since been publicly released as a transcript. I don't know if this committee is going to take itself seriously enough to treat false statements to this committee as serious matters, irrespective of who made them. But the contrast is really stark. Thank you, Chairman.
What unfolded next wasn't political posturing. It was a warning flare shot straight into the sky, because Whitehouse didn't open with mild criticism. He opened with a verdict. He said the hearing that took place the day before was an awful day in the history of this committee. And he didn't say it for effect. He said it like someone who had seen every trick in the book, every game, every dodge, every partisan stunt, and still walked into something worse. And when a senator like him, one of the last remaining institutionalists in Washington, uses language that's sharp, it means the situation wasn't just embarrassing. It was dangerous. But here's the part most people didn't catch. Whitehouse wasn't reacting to political tension. He wasn't reacting to a heated exchange. He wasn't even reacting to policy disputes. He was reacting to something far more corrosive, the normalization of dishonesty from the very people entrusted to uphold the law. This wasn't just another bad hearing. This was a moment where the top law enforcement official in the country sat down, raised her right hand, swore an oath, and then delivered statements that were not only inaccurate, not only misleading, but instantly and provably false. And that's where Whitehouse drew the line. Because the irony was blinding. Just a day before, a former FBI director had been arraigned for making false statements to this very committee. And 24 hours later, according to Whitehouse, the Attorney General herself walked into that same room and did the same thing, only bolder, louder, and in a way that wasn't ambiguous or open to interpretation. The accusations she made weren't gray. They weren't nuanced. They weren't matters of perspective. They were checkable facts that reality simply didn't support. Whitehouse focused on one of them, not because it was the only one, but because it was the clearest example of the pattern he was calling out. She claimed that he and the ranking member had accepted political contributions from someone she described as a close Epstein associate. The kind of accusation that would detonate a political career if true. The kind of allegation that could be career-ending, reputation-shattering, and instantly weaponized by enemies. But it wasn't true. And not just maybe not true. Not subject to interpretation. Not misremembered. It was impossible. Easily disproven. Public records exist, and those public records show none of it happened. The Federal Election Commission tracks every donation down to the penny. An intern could check it in 60 seconds. And yet the Attorney General of the United States made that claim under oath as if it were settled fact. That's what Whitehouse meant by new low after new low. Because if the standard for truth in congressional testimony is going to depend on which party benefits from the lie, then the entire concept of accountability collapses. And that's the precise moment where democratic systems begin to rot. Not with coups, not with revolutions, but with silence, with indifference, with the slow acceptance of dishonesty because your side happens to gain from it. Whitehouse wasn't having it. Not that day, but the false campaign contribution claim wasn't the only misinformation he highlighted. It was just the first domino. Because right after exposing that lie, he pulled the curtain back on something even more unsettling. the series of misleading statements from the current FBI director, Kos Patel. Patel had testified earlier that he couldn't answer questions about his grand jury testimony in the Mar-a-Lago case because, according to him, the DOJ had sealed the transcript and a federal court had issued an order preventing him from discussing it. He even identified which judge supposedly issued the order. He said all of this as if it were established fact. Only it wasn't. The chief judge of the D.C. District Court later confirmed that no such order existed. There was nothing preventing Patel from discussing his testimony. Nothing stopping him from answering questions. Nothing stopping him from telling Congress the truth. His entire justification collapsed the moment the judge spoke up. Which raises the question Whitehouse subtly pointed to. Why did Patel say it at all? Mistake? Misunderstanding? Or something more intentional? Whitehouse didn't speculate. He didn't need to. Instead, he pointed out something even more damning. The Attorney General refused to correct him. When he gave statements that were demonstrably false, she didn't protect him. She didn't clarify his claims. She didn't defend him. She simply left those statements hanging in the air, exposed and unsupported, while Patel insisted he had pushed for his transcript to be publicly released. Another claim Whitehouse said was false. There was no released transcript. There was no sealed order. There was no legal prohibition. Once again, the truth wasn't complicated. It was basic. Yes or no. Publicly available or not. Confirmed or not. And yet the testimony was riddled with contradictions and inaccuracies. That's what Whitehouse was sounding the alarm about. Not the political drama. Not the media narrative. Not the headlines. He was warning about something deeper. The internal breakdown of honesty inside the institutions tasked with enforcing the law. Because if the Attorney General can walk into a congressional hearing and make false claims with no consequence, if the FBI director can provide misleading statements about his own testimony without correction, if the DOJ can selectively bring charges against some officials for lying while ignoring lies from others, then what exactly is the standard? What separates? Justice from loyalty? Facts from fiction? Law from politics? Whitehouse has been on the Judiciary Committee long enough to see patterns, not isolated incidents. And the pattern he described wasn't a partisan grievance. It was an integrity crisis, one that hits at the very core of democratic accountability, transparency, honesty, and equal enforcement under the law. He described the hearing not as embarrassing, but as corrosive, not as tension-filled, but as dangerous, not as politically ugly, but as historically alarming. Because once lying to Congress becomes normalized, once it becomes part of the game, then everything that relies on truth begins to unravel. Oversight becomes meaningless. Accountability becomes optional. Justice becomes selective. And the entire legal system begins to operate not on facts, but on power. That's when democracies don't fall, they erode. Quietly, slowly, from the inside out. Whitehouse's words weren't dramatic by accident. They were a warning, a reminder that the system is only as strong as the people who tell the truth inside it. And lately, that list is shrinking. What he exposed wasn't simply one official being dishonest. It was a chain of deception spreading through institutions that used to set the gold standard for integrity. If top officials mislead Congress on camera, imagine what happens behind closed doors, in classified briefings, in cases that never see the light of day. This moment wasn't about political sides. It was about whether truth still has a place in the American justice system. And the final question Whitehouse left hanging in the air, the one nobody wanted to answer, was the most important of all. If we don't demand honesty from the people sworn to uphold the law, then who exactly is the law protecting? That's why this moment matters. Not for the headlines, not for the partisan fight, but because it forces us to confront a reality too many people would rather ignore. Democracy doesn't collapse in a single day. It collapses in moments like this, when lies become normal, when truth becomes negotiable, when leaders think accountability is optional. If you care about transparency, if you believe oversight still matters, if you think truth should still matter in government, make sure you're subscribed for more deep dives like this. And don't forget to like the video so more people see what's really happening behind those hearing room microphones.